Is less important than the economy. Try holding your breath while you count your money. That's a phrase I borrow from distinguished scientist Guy McPherson. For China, which aims to reach peak carbon before 2030, the green transition is vital to fighting climate change and spurring the economy. On Thursday, China released the first white paper mapping its energy transition over the past 10 years. The paper shows China's energy intensity decreasing steadily, reducing CO2 emissions by some 3 billion tons. And, hear me out, the real deal is this. Last year, China invested $676 billion in energy transition, the largest in the world and more than the US and EU combined. What exactly are the numbers telling us? What's the driving force behind this revolution, green revolution, and what impact is this having on the world? Welcome to a special edition of The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Lu Xin. I'm pleased to be joined from Oslo, Norway, early in the morning by Carl Fei, Professor of Strategy at BI Norwegian Business School and affiliated scholar at the Boao Forum for Asia. From Shanghai by YIN Haitao, Professor at the Haitao College of Economics and Management at Shanghai Jiao Tong University. From Brisbane, Australia by Warwick Powell, Adjunct Professor at Queensland University of Technology. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So let me repeat myself. According to authoritative international analysis, namely Bloomberg NEF, China's investment in energy transition, and you're seeing the chart here, totals $676 billion for the year 2023. The US number is $303 billion, less than half of that. The EU is $360 billion, just a bit over half of that. As I said, China invested more than the US and EU combined. This seems to speak for itself. Professor Fei, what does the chart tell you?
Well, I remember the first time I lived in China for a year back in 2002, there wasn't a big focus on the environment, honestly. The average person wasn't that concerned about it. They were concerned about, making more money. There's been a big transformation. Now the average person in China is really concerned about the environment, and this has gotten the government to be interested in it. And now you can see the government's taking big actions, such as the chart you show, showing that, China's clearly leading the world in what's happening. And China deserves a lot of credit for this. It's been a really big transformation. Of course, we have to remember where we're starting. So China still has challenges. The big challenge is trying to move away from coal, which is still a really large source of Chinese energy. But the direction of travel is great. And, the focus and progress that China has made, even surpassing most of their environmental goals, is really impressive. And, the world should be very thankful for this.
Professor Yin, we'll talk about all of that in just a moment, but Professor Yin, China's investment is huge. If you do a rough calculation, it's about 20 times that of India, which is also emitting a lot of CO2, meaning that in 3 weeks, China invests more than what India does in a year. How come there's such a will and resources to put into green energy transition by China?
Well, I think there are two reasons. The first reason is, this big transition, big investment actually is driven by China's very strong commitment on carbon neutrality. We are going to achieve carbon neutrality according to the plan by the year 2060. According to a report from the International Energy Agency, in order to achieve this goal, we have to shift our electricity generation from 70% from fossil fuels to roughly 70% from solar and wind. So this is huge. So actually, the big motivation driver behind this investment is our commitment to carbon neutrality. Second is, in the last few years, we see huge investment on technological advancement in the area, in the field of renewable technology. If you live in China, you are going to be amazed, how cheap the solar power is. So in my view, developing renewable technology, renewable power in China is not only policy driven. Actually, is also commercially driven. Many business leaders see investing in renewable technology as a big business opportunity. Thank you.
Warwick, what is this chart telling you? Is there a race going on between China and the US, EU, or G7 economies in terms of investing in green transition? Or really, we're seeing countries holding back, putting some kind of a break in terms of going all green versus China going steady and fast on this path?
I'm not going
sorry,
to
this
say...
this is for Warwick.
Okay.
Yeah, look, I think China's move down this path over the last decade or so has been driven really by three core things. But it's grounded in a fundamental understanding of what social economic systems actually are, and they are, in essence, energy transformation systems. Energy through people in terms of the food and the nutrients that we eat, and the energy, the fuel that makes machines work with human beings to transform materials into useful things. That fundamentally is what social economic systems are. And this move down the renewable energy or the clean energy pathway from China's perspective is driven by that core understanding with the aim of achieving three things. Firstly, to tackle the issue of climate change, the targets of carbon neutrality, and ultimately also deliver very tangible benefits in terms of clean energy and cleaning up the air and cleaning up pollution. We all know the stories of times past where heavy industrialisation left its mark in terms of smog and pollution in the major cities, and that was not a sustainable situation. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that this transition to renewable energy is actually shifting the cost of energy. So we're moving to a new lower cost plateau, and that's going to be important from an economic point of view, globally and domestically. And thirdly, once you've got renewable energy sources in place with the infrastructure in place, you also strengthen your national energy sovereignty. You become less dependent upon input resources brought in from overseas, and in this current environment where there are instabilities in the global geopolitical landscape, enhancing national energy sovereignty is an absolute necessity. So I think that's what the numbers tell me, driving down the path of these three core objectives.
Definitely a better environment, cleaner environment is also closely related to people's sense of happiness on a day-to-day basis. I want to go back to Professor Fei. The charts we're talking about China's investment among the $676 billion invested last year, actually two major chunks which caught my attention. First of all, it's in renewable energy sources, and the other is electrified transport. Have you picked up these trends? And if so, why do you think these sectors are China is investing so much in these sectors?
Well, these are two critical areas to focus on. I mean, there's a lot of pollution obviously coming, especially in China's case, historically from power generation, because China had a strong focus on coal. And step by step is trying to take actions to move away from that. And of course, there's been a real big growth in car purchases in China due to the transition it's been going through. So this has been a real opportunity to take a big stance and focus on electric vehicles. It's interesting to point out, though, that China has become the real leader in the world in terms of production of electric vehicles. And I think if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, and we said, would China potentially end up having an auto manufacturer that would be the leading brand globally of electric vehicles? Most people would say, no, I don't think that's very likely. And this is what's happened with BYD being, surely one of the two, and plenty of other Chinese companies being at the top of things. This didn't happen accidentally. This happened because the Chinese government put a lot of support into electric vehicles. and the whole world should be thankful for this. Some people in the world are saying it's too much support, and so this is unfair advantage. But if we were again having this conversation 5 or 10 years ago, people would be saying anywhere in the world, please just find someone that'll produce a reasonably affordable electric vehicle, and most people didn't think that would happen. China's the country that stepped up to this challenge and made it, and this is helping the whole world, not only China, in its in its energy transition with cheap electric vehicles.
Yeah, to follow up on your comment, Professor Fei, there's the talk of overcapacity. So along your logic, does this overcapacity narrative hold water at all?
Well, there is a little bit of it. I believe competition is a good thing. I basically don't think it's good for having tariffs that are high in most areas, and it's a good thing in the medium term, at least, that there's not just one country that is dominating any particular industry. That's because of a local environment one is in, one sees different things, one develops different things. And so it's healthy that, we have Germany being such a strong producer in cars historically, and China now emerging as a strong producer, and the U.S. being a strong producer. This is good. And so ideally, we would like to encourage that it's not only China. And this in the long term, I think, will benefit the Chinese people as well. The question is in the short term. In the short term, the most important thing is to get some adoption of electronic vehicles. And I think that, China deserves a lot of credit for investing, pushing, encouraging, and helping this to happen. I think it's important to note that if you buy, a Chinese car anywhere outside of China, it is more expensive. So this is not China dumping, when you talk about overcapacity, this is not China dumping cars on the world. If that were the case, it would be cheaper to buy Chinese electric vehicles abroad than in China. And that actually is not okay by the World Trade Organization. But that's not what we see. Chinese electric vehicles are much more expensive outside of China. The question is, it's acceptable to support R&D. It's not acceptable for a government to support production of cars. And this is where some people question a little bit what may be happening. So I think it's important that China is cognizant and careful of what's happening. I think it's good that eventually we have some competition from different countries in terms of EVs. But I think it's fantastic that China has made this big push to help the world make this initial transition.
Yeah. Well, our focus today is not on green vehicles. So let's come back to the investment that China is making in terms of green energy transition. Professor YIN, where does the money come from? This is a simple question. $676 billion, while the Chinese economy is struggling to transition from high in quantity to high in quality. Where does the money come from?
Actually, if we ask this question, people would expect, the money primarily come from the government, but that's not true. Actually, the money primarily come from the business world. The very simple fact is nowadays in China, if we look at the levelized cost of electricity generation, the electricity coming from the renewable sources is much, much cheaper than traditional sources, traditional fossil fuels. So it's rational for those companies, they make investment on power plant, on solar farms, wind turbines. And, another part, actually, big investment from the commercial side is the battery industry. In order to, when we talk about renewable energy, there is a typical issue called intermittency. In order to reduce this intermittency issue, turn renewable electricity into stabilized electricity supply, we have to have energy storage. So another big industry in China supporting the energy transition is the battery industry. And, the leading battery industry, the leading battery company, as we all know, is CATL, right? According to a report, CATL in the last 10 years, this single company made an investment on battery technology in the amount of 70 billion Chinese yuan. That is a lot. So in sum, I feel like, my big argument is this energy transition actually create a very, very good economic opportunity for the business community.
Okay, so
Yes.
it's not a question of either or. Basically, it's while you're transitioning towards a greener energy, you're also creating new growth drivers. What is your take? And if you want to comment on the previous comments, you're also welcome.
Yeah, of course.
Exactly.
This energy transition is going to create new downstream opportunities, firstly by reducing the cost of energy. Right? That's the first thing. And that's going to take place not only in China, but as China makes these technologies available globally, it will also support the development of new industries around the world. There is not a developed country in the world that is energy poor. Let's be frank about this. The main driver of economic development historically has been the ability to harness energy at scale and make that energy available for industrial activities. And until now, that process has been out of the reach economically for many, many nations. What China's doing is making available a technology platform, if you will, or a technology ecosystem that delivers highly efficient renewable energy technologies at a cost that is historically unprecedented. And this goes to, I think, a transition not only in green energy terms, but also in economic model terms. We're moving from an economy that, in effect, prices people out through scarcity to an economic model that prices people in through abundance. And I think that that is the key to understanding the economic and social benefits on top of the environmental benefits of this green energy transition.
Mm. Let's take a look at some of the other statistics that have been broken down that's released in the white paper. For instance, China's energy intensity has fallen, reducing CO2 emissions by around 3 billion tons. The average concentration of PM 2.5 has fallen by 54%, and days with heavy pollution down by 83%. Cumulative installed capacity of wind and solar power is up by 10-fold in the decade. In terms of renewable energy, China contributed over 40% of the annual additions to global renewable energy capacity. And in 2023, China's newly installed renewable energy capacity is bigger than 50% of the world's total. Professor Fei, what are the implications for the world's efforts in fighting climate change, especially for the global South countries?
So there's no question that China's made great progress, and as you can see, a dominant contributor to improving the greenhouse situation and temperature rise. The key thing that China needs to continue to focus on is decreasing coal usage. This has started to happen a bit, but there's still lots of room to happen there. But one thing I'd like to comment on is, you mentioned how does this affect globally? One of the things that I've been really happy to see is that China's not only been helping itself, but helping other countries in the world through sharing technologies and so forth, particularly with developing countries who really need this because they're in a different situation where, if you're in Africa, you almost need to increase your energy usage to become more industrialized. And so they're in a different situation than most developed countries. And China's been really helpful in, for example, helping Ethiopia to reach actually about 90% renewable energy usage, which is, one of the highest in the world. Helping in Kenya to install the largest wind farm, which is responsible for about 15% of the usage of production of energy in Kenya. So I think it's not only important that China is doing a lot at home, but China is also starting to play a role to spread the technology around the world.
Professor Yin, what is your take on the effort China has been pushing in terms of building a green Belt and Road initiative? In 2021, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced that China will not help fund another coal-fired power plant in its BRI projects. How is that being translated into reality?
Well, again, that will went back to China's strong commitment to combat global warming. In 2020, we bring up the goal, for China, we are going to reduce carbon emission. In 2021, we actually made a pledge. We are now going to build up coal-based power plants in developing countries. So that's a big commitment. Think about this. China has a big advantage on coal-based power plant development. Actually, we actually give up the economic benefit from doing this. Instead, we really turn our commitment into action. We made a lot of investment on technological advancement because of the technological progress, because of the economics of scale. We successfully lower the cost of renewable energy. We then give those technology to developing countries. I think that's a big contribution to the global community. I think that's a testimony how strongly, how determined China is going to make effort to reduce carbon emission, to combat global warming. Thank you.
To follow up on that, China does have difficulties in terms of spurring its economy, and that's a well-known fact that we are in a period of transitioning. How is China balancing the need for economic growth and the need for continuing to going green, Professor Ying?
Yeah, actually, historically, starting from 2012, China really gave environmental protection a big priority. Moving into the future, China is going to, strive for a very good balance between economic development and environmental protection. So I want to emphasize, this year we push forward a new concept called new quality productive forces.
Right.
Actually, we want to change our economic model from traditionally, resource intensive, energy intensive production to new business models, which rely less on resources, less on electricity, less on energy. I think renewable technology development is one of the directions.
One of the things that's highlighted in the white paper is that this sentence, which caught my attention, is that China has taken proactive actions to advance its energy transition, not because others are asking us to, but because we need to do it ourselves. It's not a matter of whether we can do it, but rather that we must do it. Warwick, your comments there.
Yeah, look, I think this goes to the heart of it. It starts from a recognition of the challenges and opportunities of achieving domestic ambitions, which is to improve the quality of life of 1.4 billion people, to achieve the status of decent standards of living for the majority of people over the foreseeable future, and at the same time do it in a way that is in harmony with nature. And I think that that's your starting point. And as I mentioned at the outset, those three drivers, which is the clean environmental impact driver, reduced energy costs, and ultimately deliver energy sovereignty. The other point that I noticed in that white paper, by the way, which I thought was actually really quite interesting, is a recognition that there has been increased energy efficiency for each unit of economic output produced. Right. Now, this is a startling development, because what this goes to is precisely this ability to improve standards of living whilst at the same time actually reducing the energy footprint in the processes of doing that. And I think that this is going to open up whole new ways in which not only China, but countries around the world that adopt these technologies and embed them in their economies can achieve new kinds of social and economic development, which won't look like the dirty old industries of the past.
Finally, we have about 4 minutes left, and I want a sentence from each of you. Professor Fei, what inspirational, what message do you think China's efforts can give to other countries, which some seem to be dragging their feet in terms of fighting climate change because the economy is not doing well?
I think it shows that if you have a good vision from the top that the people also push for, that an awful lot can be accomplished. It's really impressive. I think, if we had this show 10 years ago, we wouldn't predict that we're where we are today.
And Professor Ying?
Well, I'm really encouraged by China's transition to clean energy. I hope we can work together as a global community for a more sustainable future. Thank you.
And Warwick?
Look, developing countries have an opportunity in front of them that they haven't had for centuries, and that is to grab this technological advancement with two hands, embed clean energy systems into their social economic systems, transform the quality of life of their people, and at the same time contribute to better environmental outcomes globally.
Well, you've been all very good boys because you really stick to the one-sentence directive. Now I have a little bit more time. Let me go to Professor Fei. Do you see a danger, though, at this moment? What is the biggest danger we're seeing? Because I seem to see that some people are trying to put an ideological tag on green technology. Is that what you're seeing as well? What would you caution against?
What I'm most concerned about is that ideology creates countries to have incentives to put in tariff barriers so that sharing of technologies does not happen. We need to decrease barriers. We need to share technologies because whatever China does doesn't only affect China. It affects the whole world. If China's polluting their air, it comes to Norway too. So I hope that countries will cut down these tariff barriers. And by the way, Norway, where I live, is trying to help with that. For example, we're one of the few places in the world that hasn't put high tariffs on Chinese.
And is Chinese
EVs.
cars flooding Norway?
They're important, playing an important role, but you can still buy a Tesla, and Tesla's still the most popular car. Although Chinese
market
cars
will regulate itself. Yeah, Professor YIN.
Well, I think we shall not see that as an ideological issue, but more on technological issue. Moving into the future, we still have a lot of challenges. One of the challenges, in my view, is how we can smoothly feed the renewable electricity generated from wind and solar into the grid system. So we really want to work together, focusing on technological issue instead of some disputes. Thank you.
And Warwick?
Look, countries that want to adopt an ideological or a geopolitical posture in relation to the transition to cleaner energies are welcome to do so. It will be to their disadvantage, and ultimately they will need to answer to their communities and their people. I would hope that they won't be persuaded by the ideological and commercial interests of the traditional industry sectors that have been polluting the world for decades. But, at the end of the day, these dynamics will play out locally first, but hopefully rationality will prevail.
Well, I hope to revisit this topic 10 years later and see where we are getting. I am pretty confident that we are only going to go even greener. Many thanks to my guest, Carl Fei, Professor of Strategy at BI Norwegian Business School, YIN Haitao, Professor at the Haitao College of Economics and Management at Shanghai Jiao Tong University, and Warwick Powell, Adjunct Professor at Queensland University.